The town of Redstone Gulch had a saying. The desert doesn't bury secrets. It just waits for the right wind to uncover them. And on the morning of October 14th, 1882, that wind finally came. It rode in on the back of a lone rider, a man with no wagon, no companions, and no luggage except a worn leather saddlebag and a pistol that sat too comfortably on his hip. He didn't look like trouble. That was the first lie. Because in Redstone Gulch, the things that looked calm were always the most dangerous. The rider stopped his horse at the edge of town. Just stopped. Sat there in the saddle like a statue carved from red rock and patience. He looked down Main Street the way a man looks at a graveyard. Quiet, respectful, and completely unafraid. Then he dismounted, tied his horse to the post outside the saloon, and walked to a small house at the far end of the street. The one with the broken fence and the dried flowers in the window box. He knocked. The door opened, and the woman standing there, her eyes wide, her breath stolen right out of her chest, stared at him like she was looking at a ghost. He pulled the brim of his hat down, just slightly, and said the words that would change everything. "Your sister sent me. She said you needed a husband. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Sending love your way wherever you are. Because this story, it isn't just about love. It isn't just about the West. It's about what happens when a desperate letter, a dangerous secret, and a man with a buried past all arrive at the same door on the same day. Stay with me. This is going to be one to remember." 6 weeks before the stranger rode into Redstone Gulch, a letter was written by candlelight in a boarding house in Santa Fe. The woman writing it had ink-stained fingers and a cough that hadn't left her in 3 months. Her name was Clara Whitfield. She was 24 years old, and she was dying. Not dramatically, not quickly, just slowly, the way a candle dies, flickering smaller and smaller until one night it simply doesn't come back. Clara knew it. The doctor had told her. She had maybe a season left, perhaps 2 if God was feeling generous. But Clara wasn't thinking about herself when she dipped that pen into the inkwell. She was thinking about her sister. Her name was May Whitfield, 26 years old. Living alone in Redstone Gulch after their father's death left her the small house and nothing else. No land, no cattle, no husband, just a broken fence, a garden that barely grew, and a reputation in town for being too proud and too stubborn to ask for help. May was fierce. Clara had always admired that about her. But fierceness doesn't keep you warm at night, and it doesn't protect you when the wolves start circling, and in Redstone Gulch there were wolves circling May. The kind that wore boots and carried deeds to land and smiled with their teeth showing. One wolf in particular. His name was Hollis Crane. He owned the largest cattle operation in the county, 3 saloons, and most of the local sheriff. He wanted May's land because her property sat at the only clean water source for 20 miles. A creek that never ran dry, even in August. And Hollis Crane was a man who understood one truth above all others. Water is power. He'd offered to buy the land twice. May had refused twice. After the second refusal, he stopped making offers and started making threats. Nothing direct. Nothing that could be taken to a judge. Just small things. May's horse found with a cut shoe. Her fence posts knocked down in the night. A rock thrown through her window with no note attached. Clara knew all of this from May's letters. And Clara, despite her fading lungs and her fading days, had come up with a plan. She needed someone to go to Redstone Gulch. Someone who could stand beside May not as charity, not as a farmhand, but as something Hollis Crane couldn't legally threaten or remove. A husband. Not a real one, necessarily. Just something convincing enough to buy May time. To give her legal standing. To put a man between her and Crane long enough for May to figure out her next move. The problem was finding that man. Clara's options were limited. She couldn't afford to hire anyone. She didn't know lawyers or ranchers or decent men with free time. What she knew was the boarding house, the doctor's office, and a handful of regulars at the small cafe across the street. Including one man who came in every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Always sat at the same table by the window. Always ordered black coffee and cornbread. Always tipped more than the meal cost. never caused trouble, never raised his voice. His name was Eli Cross. Clara had learned a few things about him through quiet observation and a loose-lipped cafe owner. Eli was 31, former ranch hand, had some military history that people mentioned but never detailed. He'd been in Santa Fe for almost 4 months, doing small work here and there, fixing fences, hauling freight, the kind of labor that kept a man fed without attaching him to anything or anyone. He was clearly running from something. Clara recognized that look. She'd seen it in the mirror for years, but there was something else she noticed. The way he gave his seat to an old woman who came in out of the rain. The way he once picked up a child's dropped doll without being asked and carried it back across the street without expecting a thank you. Small things, quiet things, the kind of things that told a dying woman more about a man's character than any reference letter ever could. So Clara did something bold. She wrote him a letter first, slipped it under his room door at the boarding house, because the cafe owner had mentioned where he stayed. She introduced herself, explained May's situation plainly, made no promises she couldn't keep, offered him nothing except a roof over his head, a place to stay through winter, and the word of a dying woman that the cause was worth it. She expected him to ignore it. He didn't. 2 days later, a folded note appeared under her door. "I'll go. No payment needed. Just tell me her name and where to find her." That was it. No conditions. No negotiations. No lengthy explanation of his reasons. Clara stared at that note for a long time. Then she wrote back with everything Eli would need to know. May's name, her address in Redstone Gulch, a brief description of Hollis Crane, and one warning at the bottom that she underlined twice. "My sister is not easy. She will not trust you. She may not even let you in the door. But if you can earn her trust, even a little, it might be enough to save her. Please don't let her be alone in this." She sent her second letter the same day. This one addressed to May. She kept it short. She knew May hated long letters almost as much as she hated pity. So Clara wrote only what was necessary. "May, I've sent someone to you. His name is Eli Cross. He's a good man, I believe, though I'll admit I hardly know him. He knows your situation. He's agreed to help. Please don't shoot him before he explains himself. I love you more than all the red rocks in New Mexico. Clara." Clara sealed both letters, handed them to the mail runner, paid the postage with the last of her coin. Then she sat back in her chair, closed her eyes, and listened to the quiet of the room. Somewhere out there, she hoped, a man was already saddling his horse. May Whitfield didn't cry when she read Clara's letter. She wanted to. The wanting was a tight, burning thing behind her sternum, like a coal that wouldn't quite catch. But May had learned a long time ago that crying was something you did in private, in the dark, after you checked every lock on every door. So she folded the letter carefully, placed it in the tin box under the floorboard with their father's pocket watch and her mother's wedding ring. And then she went outside to fix the section of fence that had been knocked down again in the night. She swung the hammer like she was angry at the post, because she was. Not at the post. Not at Clara. At the situation. At Hollis Crane. At the fact that her dying sister's best idea was to send a stranger to play house at the edge of the desert. At the fact that May, who had walked 15 miles through a flash flood at 16 to bring medicine to a sick neighbor, who had handled a rattlesnake in the barn with nothing but a shovel and nerve, needed saving at all. She didn't need a husband. She needed Hollis Crane to fall into his own dry well and stay there. But Clara had asked, and May couldn't say no to Clara, especially not now. May was a striking woman, though she'd have dismissed that description entirely. Tall for the time, lean from years of physical work, with dark hair she kept braided and tucked under a hat most days. She had her father's jaw strong set, the kind that made people sense they should choose their words carefully. And she had her mother's eyes, a brown so deep it looked black in certain lights, capable of warmth and capable of ice, often in the same minute. She'd had offers before, real ones and otherwise. She'd refused them all. Not from lack of longing. Loneliness was something May understood deeply, even if she'd never admitted it to another living soul. But because the men who'd come to her door had wanted the land first and the woman attached to it second. May had enough self-respect to know the difference. The morning Eli Cross rode into Redstone Gulch, May was on the roof. She was relaying shingles that had come loose in last week's wind. She had her hammer, her nails, her hat pulled low against the October sun, and absolutely no intention of climbing down before she finished. She saw the rider from up there, saw him stop at the edge of town, watched him scan the street, watched him tie his horse and walk, not toward the saloon like most riders, not toward the hotel, but straight toward her house. She didn't climb down. She watched him from the roof as he came up the path, stepped over the broken gate, and knocked on her door. When there was no answer, he stepped back and looked at the house with a calm expression. Then he looked up at the roof. Their eyes met. May held her hammer and said nothing. He took off his hat. He had dark hair, sun-weathered skin, and a face that looked like it had weathered its share of difficult seasons. Not ugly, not handsome in any showy way, just solid. Worn in the way a good saddle is worn in. May Whitfield? He called up. Depends who's asking, she said. Eli Cross. Your sister sent me. A long silence stretched between them. A crow landed on the fence post below, looked at both of them, then flew off again like it wanted no part of this conversation. I got the letter, May said finally. Then you know why I'm here. I know what Clara thinks you're here for. He nodded, slow and patient. What do you think I'm here for? May stared at him. She was trying to read him the way she read weather, looking for signs of what was really coming. She'd gotten good at that. The desert had taught her. So had men. What she saw surprised her slightly. He wasn't performing. He wasn't smiling in that easy, charm-first way that usually meant a man was selling something. He wasn't nervous either. And men who came to her door were almost always nervous, because May had a way of making people feel like they were being evaluated by someone far less forgiving than they'd prepared for. Eli Cross just looked at her like a man who had nowhere else to be and was comfortable waiting. You can put your horse around back, she said finally. There's a trough with water. I'll be down in 10 minutes. Don't go inside the house. Wasn't planning to, he said. I mean it, she said. So do I, he said. He put his hat back on and walked around the side of the house without another word. May turned back to her shingles. She laid 3 more before she climbed down. Not because she needed the 10 minutes to finish the work. She needed the 10 minutes to finish the argument she was having with herself. The argument went something like this: he could be dangerous. He could be exactly what Crane sends to get close to you. Counter. Clara trusted him. Clara is not naive. Clara is also dying and desperate and not thinking clearly. Counter. Clara thinks more clearly than anyone you've ever known. This is foolish. You don't need this. Counter. May. You're alone. And winter is coming. And Crane is not going to stop. She hit the last shingle harder than necessary and climbed down. When she came around the back, Eli was crouched beside the trough, letting his horse drink. He wasn't looking at the house. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the creek, the silver thread of it through the scrub brush and red dirt. He said, without turning around, that water source is why he wants this land. May stopped walking. You know about Crane? Clara told me enough, he said. He finally stood and turned. You should know. I'm not here to fight him for you. I'm here to stand beside you while you fight him yourself. May studied him for a long, hard moment. Good answer, she said quietly. Come inside. Redstone Gulch had 312 residents. Give or take a handful of drifters and the occasional traveler passing through to somewhere more promising. It had 2 saloons, 1 church, a general store, a land office, a blacksmith, a doctor who mostly treated saddle sores and broken bones, and precisely 0 tolerance for minding its own business. The morning after Eli Cross arrived, the town knew about him. By afternoon, they had theories. By evening, the stories had multiplied the way desert weeds multiply after rain. Fast, invasive, and almost impossible to stop. The general version, pieced together from fragments overheard at the water barrel, debated over card tables, and whispered between women hanging laundry, was this: May Whitfield had taken in a man. A stranger. A man who'd arrived alone, said something to her in the street, Nobody had quite heard what, and been invited inside. For Redstone Gulch, this was enormously significant. May Whitfield had never invited anyone inside. Not neighbors. Not the preacher who'd tried twice. Not even the woman who brought food after her father's funeral, who had been received at the door and thanked sincerely but not crossed the threshold. So the fact that this man, this nobody from nowhere with a tired horse and a gun on his hip, had walked into May Whitfield's house on the first day was either remarkable or suspicious, depending on who was doing the talking. In the saloon that night, the talk fell mostly to the suspicious side. This was Hollis Crane's preferred territory. He owned the bigger of the two saloons, the Red Spur, and he held court at it the way a king holds court in a throne room, except the throne was a reinforced chair by the far window and the courtiers were ranch hands, hired guns, and local men who'd found it financially prudent to stay on Crane's good side. Crane himself was a large man. Not fat, large in the structural sense, like he'd been built with extra material to fill more space than most men needed. He had a silver mustache, small blue eyes that were always slightly amused, and hands that were permanently rough from decades of real work before he'd gotten rich enough to pay others to do it. He was 53 years old. He had been married once. His wife had left him 11 years ago and hadn't looked back, which told you something. When word reached Crane about the stranger at May Whitfield's place, he listened to it without expression. Then he sent 2 of his men to find out what they could. They came back an hour later. The stranger's name was Eli Cross. Nobody in Redstone Gulch knew him. He wasn't from around here. Didn't seem to have regular work. His horse was a good one. That was noted because a man's horse tells you something about his financial situation and his priorities. His gear was worn but quality. He wasn't some drifter passing through. Crane turned his glass slowly on the table. He's still at her place? Lights were on when we went past, one of them said. Both of them inside. Crane said nothing for a moment. Then he smiled, that particular smile he had that didn't involve his eyes at all. Find out more, he said. Discreetly. The word discreetly in Crane's vocabulary meant something different than it did in most people's vocabularies. But his men understood it, and they nodded, and they left. What they didn't know, what no one in the saloon knew yet, was that across town, in May Whitfield's kitchen, the nature of the situation was being negotiated over 2 cups of coffee that May had made strong enough to stun a horse. Eli had told her everything Clara had written to him. He didn't embroider it. He didn't try to make himself sound better than the letter made him look. He just told it plainly, the way you tell something true. May had listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When he finished, she'd asked exactly 4 questions. 1. Did you have a reason of your own for agreeing to this, beyond Clara's letter? He'd been quiet a beat too long. Then he said, I had time on my hands and a feeling that I owed something to someone. Your sister just gave me a direction. May had accepted that, though she filed the too long pause away. 2. Are you wanted anywhere? He'd looked at his coffee cup. Not currently. May had noted the word currently. 3. Can you shoot? When I need to. Short. Flat. The voice of someone who has answered that question with their body before and didn't feel the need to discuss it. For what do you want out of this? This one he'd answered without hesitation. Nothing that you're not willing to give. Clara asked me to stand beside you. That's what I intend to do. If you decide at any point this isn't working or you don't trust me, I'll leave. No argument. May had stared at him for a long moment. Then she'd refilled his coffee cup without asking if he wanted more, which in May's language was approximately the equivalent of a handshake. They'd agreed on the arrangement. Eli would stay in the small outbuilding, the one her father had used as a workshop, and he'd be present in town as often as needed to make the situation visible. To let Crane see that May was not alone. Whether they told people they were married or simply implied it was a question May had left open for the night. What she hadn't left open was what she said when Eli stood to head to the outbuilding. If you betray me, she said, in the same tone a person uses to state the weather, I will make sure you regret it. I want you to know that clearly. Eli had stopped at the door. He turned around. I know it, he said, and something in the way he said it, not offended, not amused, just honest, told May that he meant it. She locked the door after him. And for the first time in a long time, she slept through the night. The workshop outbuilding had a cot someone had left behind, a small wood stove, and a window that faced east. The first morning, Eli woke before the sun and lay still in the dark, listening to the particular silence of the desert before dawn. That breathless, suspended quiet that feels like the world is deciding whether to continue. He'd slept in worse places, considerably worse. He lay there thinking about what May had asked him. What do you want out of this? He'd answered her truthfully as far as he'd gone. But he hadn't answered the question completely, because the complete answer was longer and more tangled than a kitchen table conversation warranted. The longer answer started with a name: Thomas Cross. His brother. Thomas had been younger, sharper in some ways, blunter in others. The kind of man who led with his heart and usually got it broken for the effort. He'd moved to a town called Lander Creek 3 years ago and fallen in love with a woman. A widow with a piece of land and a creek running through it. Crane wasn't in Lander Creek. But there were men like Crane everywhere in the West, and the man in Lander Creek had wanted Thomas's girl's land for the same reason Crane wanted May's. The difference was Thomas had fought back openly, loudly, without the patience or the strategy the situation required. He'd been shot in the back on a Thursday evening while coming out of the general store. The man who shot him was never charged. Thomas was buried in a town where nobody powerful cared enough to pursue justice, and the widow had lost her land within a year. Eli had been in the military then, in the Southern Territories, too far away to know until it was over. He'd come back to find his brother in the ground and everyone advising him to accept it and move on. He hadn't accepted it. But he'd moved on because staying in Lander Creek without the means to fight the right way would have just gotten him killed too. He'd spent 2 years carrying that weight, working, moving, watching, trying to understand what he should have done differently, trying to figure out what different would have even looked like. Clara's letter had arrived at the exact moment he'd run out of answers and started needing a reason. He wasn't here only because Clara had asked. He was here because May's situation was Thomas's situation with a different name. And he hadn't been there for Thomas. He was here now. He told himself that was the only reason. He also told himself, with less conviction each morning, that May's dark eyes and her weathered hammer and her complete refusal to ask for any softness she hadn't earned had nothing to do with it. That was mostly a lie by the end of the first week. Because the first week was something Eli hadn't expected. He'd expected guardedness. He got it. He'd expected distrust. He got that too. What he hadn't expected was May herself, the specific texture of her, which was harder and more layered than a man could gather from Clara's letter or even from the first night's negotiation. She was up every morning before 6, working the garden or doing repairs, always moving, always purposeful. She wasn't performing industry. She was just someone who genuinely could not remain still when things needed doing. She cooked well and ate practically. The way people eat when food is fuel and pleasure is something you allow yourself only after the work is done. She read in the evenings. Heavy, serious books she'd somehow acquired in a town with no bookstore. Philosophy, history, one battered copy of Shakespeare with pages gone at the edges. She read the way she did everything else, completely and without self-consciousness. Eli discovered this the third evening when he knocked on the door to tell her a section of the back fence had come loose again and found her at the kitchen table so absorbed that she didn't hear him. Until he knocked twice. She'd looked up with the expression of someone returning from another continent. Then she'd said, without any awkwardness, "Fence. Back section," he said. "I can fix it in the morning if you have the materials." "Barn," she said. "Top shelf. Left side." Then she'd looked back at her book. He'd stood there a second longer than necessary before he turned and left. In town, the arrangement was performing its intended function. People saw Eli with May at the general store. They saw him at the post office. They saw him in the places a man is seen when he belongs somewhere. Redstone Gulch drew its own conclusions as May had known it would, and the conclusions were what she needed, that May Whitfield was no longer alone. Whether they were married or something else, the town wasn't certain. But Crane's men, the ones who'd been knocking over fence posts in the night, had stopped. That was what mattered. What Crane was doing instead was less visible and therefore more concerning. The land office clerk, a small, sweating man named Denny who was loyal to whoever paid him last, told Crane something important at the end of week 1. He'd found an old territorial record suggesting that May's property claim had an irregularity, a filing inconsistency from when her father had transferred the deed before his death. It was small, the kind of thing that might not matter under normal circumstances. But Crane had a lawyer in the county seat, and lawyers were very good at making small things matter enormously. Crane sent for him. This Eli didn't know yet. What he did know was that, on the 7th morning, May came out of the house while he was working on the fence and handed him a cup of coffee without being asked. He looked at the cup, then at her. She was already looking at the horizon, not at him. "Don't read into it," she said. "It's just coffee." "All right," he said. She went back inside. Eli looked down at the coffee. It was made exactly the way he liked it. Strong, no sugar. He hadn't told her that. He looked at the house for a moment. Then he took a sip and went back to work. The lawyer's name was Gerald Fitch. He arrived from the county seat on a Wednesday, riding in a rented buggy that was too fine for Redstone Gulch and not quite fine enough for a man of his professional opinion of himself. He had wire-rimmed glasses, a brown wool suit that had seen 3 seasons too many, and a briefcase that contained, among other things, a legal argument that he believed was nearly airtight. Crane met him at the Red Spur. The argument was this: when Edward Whitfield, May and Clara's father, had transferred the property deed to his daughters before his death, there had been a procedural error. A witness signature was missing from the territorial registration form, under a specific provision of territorial land law that Fitch had excavated from a dusty filing cabinet like a man digging for buried gold. An unwitnessed transfer could be challenged and declared void. If void, the land reverted to an open claim status. An open claim that Hollis Crane could then file on. "How solid is this?" Crane asked. "Solid enough to take to a judge," Fitch said. "A sympathetic one." "I know a sympathetic one," Crane said. "Then I'd say," Fitch said, cleaning his glasses, "that Miss Whitfield has approximately 60 days before she has no legal standing to the property whatsoever." Crane tapped the table once. "File it." What neither man counted on, what Crane's intelligence network in Redstone Gulch had somehow missed, was that May Whitfield had already been to the post office that same Wednesday morning. She'd received a letter. Not from Clara this time. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, and May had stood in the street and turned it over twice before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in a tight, educated hand. No return address. No signature. Just information. "They found a filing error on your deed. Fitch arrives Wednesday. You have time." The original witness was H. Garrity, former county clerk. He retired to Tucson. If you can prove intent of transfer, you can challenge the void claim. "Find Garrity." May read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket and walked home quickly. Eli was behind the house splitting firewood when she came around the corner with the kind of expression that made him set down the axe without being asked. She gave him the note. He read it. His face stayed still, but she'd gotten good at reading the stillness, and what she read in it wasn't calm. It was controlled. "Who sent this?" he asked. "I don't know. Someone in town who knows Crane's business." "Yes. That's either a friend or a trap." "I know," May said. "I've been weighing both." They stood in the cool October air for a moment, the firewood between them, the distant sound of the creek running below. "H. Garrity," Eli said slowly. "You know the name?" May asked. He hesitated, that same fractional pause she'd noticed the first night. Then, "I know of county clerks in this territory. Not him specifically, but if he signed the original record, he can testify to the intent of the transfer. That would hold in court, depending on the judge." "Crane has a judge," May said flatly. "Then you need a different one. Or you need to get to Garrity before Crane does." May looked at him. "Tucson is 4 days by horse. 3 if you push. I can't leave. If I leave, this place is unguarded. Crane will move the moment I'm gone. Then I'll go, Eli said. May blinked. It wasn't a large reaction. Just a single blink and a slight shift in her posture. But Eli had learned to read her silences the way she read the desert sky. You'd go to Tucson, she said. Find Garrity. Get a written statement. Bring it back. And if something happens here while you're gone? Something might happen anyway, he said. At least this way you'd have a legal defense ready. May turned away from him and looked at the creek. The water caught the afternoon light the way it always did, silver and quick and indifferent to all of this. There's another problem, she said quietly. Clara. Eli waited. She wrote me again. 3 days ago. May paused. She's worse. Silence. Tucson is where she is, Eli said slowly. Yes, May said. It is. Another silence, thicker this time. May turned back to him. I could ride with you. And leave the land. And leave the land, she said. It came out harder than she intended because saying it out loud made it real, the impossible mathematics of it. Stay and possibly lose everything legally. Go and possibly lose everything physically. I want to see her, May said. Her voice had dropped. It was the first genuinely unguarded thing she'd said to him in 2 weeks. Eli looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. It was quiet and direct and contained something that surprised them both. That evening they made the plan. May would stay. Eli would ride to Tucson. He'd find Garrity, get the statement and go to see Clara. He'd bring May's letter with him. She wrote it that night at the kitchen table while he sat nearby, not reading, just present, because neither of them seemed inclined to be alone with this particular weight. When she finished writing, she folded it and held it in her hands for a moment. Then she held it out to him. He took it. Their fingers touched at the edge of the paper. Neither of them said anything about it. You leave at dawn, she said. I leave at dawn, he agreed. He left the kitchen and walked across the dark yard to the outbuilding. May sat at the table alone, her hands flat on the wood. Outside, the wind had come up. It was moving through the canyon behind the house, low and long, like something calling from very far away. She didn't know yet what Crane had already set in motion. She would find out in the morning, before Eli could ride. Eli woke at 4 in the morning to the sound of horses. Not one, several, moving fast down the road toward the house, then slowing. He was off the cot and at the window in the space of 3 seconds. The way a man moves when his body has been trained by experience to distinguish between sounds that mean nothing and sounds that mean something very bad is happening. For riders, stopping at the gate, one of them carrying a lantern. He pulled on his boots and his coat and strapped on his gun belt in the dark with the efficient movements of someone who had done it quickly before. He was out the outbuilding door and moving toward the house by the time the knock came. Not a knock. Pounding. May's light was already on. She beat him to the door by 10 seconds. He came around the corner of the house and stopped when he saw her standing in the doorway, fully dressed, which meant she hadn't slept, and Hollis Crane on her step. Crane had brought his lawyer. He'd brought his foreman and one other man who stood by the horses with a lantern and the particular stance of someone there to observe and testify, not to participate. Crane held a document. Miss Whitfield, he said. He spoke with the measured calm of a man holding all the cards. I apologize for the early hour. This couldn't wait. It could have waited until the sun came up, May said. But you chose to come now, which tells me something. Crane smiled. This is a notice of legal challenge to your property deed, filed yesterday with Judge Alton in the county seat. May didn't take the document. She looked at it in his hand for a moment and said nothing. The filing irregularity was discovered by Mr. Fitch, Crane continued, gesturing to the lawyer. We've been thorough. I want you to know this is nothing personal, May. It's a legal matter. Everything you've done to me has been legal, May said. The cut shoe on my horse, the rocks through my window, knocking down my fence in the night. All legal. Crane's smile didn't flicker. I don't know what you're talking about. That was when Eli stepped fully around the corner of the house and into the lantern light. Crane's eyes moved to him immediately. They stayed there for a long, measuring moment. "This must be the man you've taken in," Crane said. "His name is Eli Cross," May said. "He's my husband." The word landed in the air between all of them like a stone dropped into still water. Eli didn't move. He kept his expression level. He was watching the two men by the horses and Crane's foreman with the peripheral attention of someone counting threats. Crane studied Eli with those small, amused eyes. "Recent marriage?" "Recent enough," May said. Crane looked back at her. "The legal challenge stands regardless. A property claim irregularity isn't affected by marital status." "I'm aware," May said. "I have 60 days. Crane blinked. Just slightly. That surprised him that she knew the number. "Give or take," he said. "I thought you'd appreciate the advance notice." "I appreciate nothing from you," May said. "You've delivered your paper. You can leave now." Crane looked at Eli one more time. There was something in that look, an appraisal. The kind a man makes when he's trying to determine whether the obstacle in front of him is serious or theatrical. "Cross," he said. "You're not from around here." "No," Eli said. "Then let me offer you some honest advice, man to man. This land dispute has been a long time coming. It's going to resolve in one direction. The law is going to see to that. Whatever arrangement you have with this woman, I suggest you consider whether it's worth the trouble that's coming." Silence. The lantern flickered. Eli looked at Crane steadily. Not with aggression. Not with performance. Just the calm, direct gaze of a man who has already decided what he's going to do and doesn't need the other man's opinion of it. "Good night," Eli said. Crane held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked back to his horse. His men followed. The lantern moved away down the road, swinging, until it was a small orange point in the dark. Then nothing. May hadn't moved from the doorway. Eli looked at her. She was holding the doorframe with one hand, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked tired in a way that was more than physical. It was the tiredness that comes from fighting something alone for too long. "He filed," she said quietly. "He filed," Eli confirmed. "That means the notice is with Alton. We have limited time. You need to leave for Tucson this morning." "I was already planning to." May looked at him. Something moved in her face that she didn't quite close off in time. "What you said just now," he said. "That I'm your husband." She looked away. "It's what Clara arranged. It's what we agreed to tell people if needed." "I know," he said. "I wasn't questioning it." "Then what were you saying?" He thought for a moment. "Nothing yet," he said. "Some things need time." She looked back at him. The sky behind the canyon was beginning to gray at the edges. The first suggestion of morning. The stars were fading the way stars fade. Not all at once, but gradually, one quiet defeat at a time. "Go inside and eat something," Eli said. "I'll saddle up." "Eli." He stopped. "Bring her a letter from me," May said. "I've written 3 and sent none of them. The one I gave you last night." She stopped, steadied. "Make sure she gets it." He held her eyes. "She'll get it." And he turned and walked to the barn. May stood in the doorway until she couldn't hear his footsteps anymore. Then she went inside and put water on the stove. And she waited for morning. Eli made it to Tucson in 2.5 days. He found H. Garrity in a small house near the edge of town. An old man with careful handwriting and a clear memory who, when he understood what was at stake, agreed without hesitation. He signed the statement. He had a copy of the original filing in his personal records, kept out of old habit and a clerk's instinct for preservation. He said, "I remember Edward Whitfield. He was a good man. Whatever I can do for his daughters." Eli brought the statement to a territorial judge he'd tracked down through a contact. Not Crane's judge, a different one, a woman from Santa Fe who had a reputation for rigidity and impartiality in equal measure. She reviewed the statement and Garrity's documentation and set a hearing date. 60 days became 40. 40 became enough. Then Eli went to see Clara. He sat by her bed in the boarding house and he told her everything. Not the way a man reports, but the way a man tells a story to someone who deserves to know it fully. He told her about the roof and the hammer. About the coffee made the way he liked it without being asked. About the fence posts in the night and Crane on the step and the word husband landing in the lantern light. Clara listened with her eyes closed and a small, tired smile on her face. When he finished, she opened her eyes and looked at him with the clear-sighted calm of someone who has made peace with the shape of things. "Did you give her my letter?" she asked. "I gave her yours," he said. "I have hers for you." He placed it on the blanket beside her hand. She covered it with her palm without opening it. "I knew you were right," she said softly. "When I slipped that note under your door, I knew." He didn't know what to say to that. So he said, "Thank you for the direction." Clara laughed. Just slightly, just enough. Then she closed her eyes again. Eli rode back to Redstone Gulch. May was standing on the road when he came into town. She'd heard his horse before she saw him. She was standing at the gate, arms at her sides, and when he dismounted, she looked at the saddlebag like she was afraid to ask. He pulled out the legal documents first, set them in her hands. She looked at them, then up at him. "She got your letter?" she asked. "She got it." May nodded, a single tight nod. Her jaw set, her eyes bright in a way she couldn't prevent and didn't seem to want to. "And Garrity?" "Signed and sealed and in front of a proper judge." May exhaled slowly. It was the longest exhale he'd ever heard from her. Like something had been held in her chest for months and was finally, carefully, being released. The hearing was held 3 weeks later. Crane's challenge was dismissed. The deed stood. Hollis Crane left Redstone Gulch the following spring for reasons that were never fully documented. Some said he'd overextended financially. Some said a few too many of his dealings had come to light in ways that even a sympathetic judge couldn't overlook. Some said he simply decided the water wasn't worth the cost anymore. Clara Whitfield died on a cold morning in January, with May's last letter in her hand. May got the news by telegram. She read it standing in the kitchen, the telegram in one hand and the coffee going cold on the stove behind her. Eli was there. He didn't say anything. He just pulled a chair up beside her and sat down. After a long time, May said, "She fixed everything, even at the end. That's so like her." "Yes," he said. "It is." They sat in the kitchen until the light changed. The creek ran outside silver and quick, the way it always had. Years later, when people in Redstone Gulch told the story, and they did tell it because good stories don't die in small towns, they just change shape, they always focused on the beginning. On the stranger who rode in with no luggage and a quiet gun. And the words he'd whispered at the door. "Your sister sent me. She said you needed a husband." What they argued about, endlessly and cheerfully, over cards and coffee and long summer evenings, was what happened after. Because some stories, the ones worth telling, don't really end. They just find a place to rest. What would you have done in May's place? Would you have let him in? Thank you for watching. If the story moved you, if it stayed with you even a little, leave a comment below. Tell me what part hit you hardest. And if you know someone who loves a good Western story, share this with them. More stories are coming. Stay with me.